And now, live from high atop the square in downtown Albia, Just Start Talking.
With me on the line today, Joryn Jenkins. She's a collaborative lawyer, and she has a topic entitled Co-Parenting Challenges for During the Holidays. And Joryn, thank you for calling in and being with us here on KIIC.
Happy to be here.
You're an author of a couple of books, War or Peace, Avoiding the Destruction of Divorce Court, and then another book, I Never Saw My Father Again, and that's The Divorce Court Effect. And those books, tell us a little bit about each one to get started on this interview.
Well, it's funny because once I started, I've been doing litigation for 42 years, and probably 10 or 15 years ago, I started doing this thing called collaborative divorce. Rather than taking families to court, we sit them down and we work through the issues and really feel out where the problem areas are and get people talking again, which by the time you're getting divorced, you're really not talking anymore. You're certainly not communicating. You may be putting words out there that just aren't landing. And I thought, well, you know what? These folks who are coming to see me don't quite get what I'm trying to explain to them. So I wrote a book. And the first book was War or Peace, because that's really what it's about. You have a choice. You can either go to court, which is what most lawyers know how to do, and they don't even suggest that there's an alternative to that. You file your paperwork, and the other side gets their petition and or whatever it's called in your state, the complaint, and they feel like they're attacked because the lawyer puts in what the lawyer puts in, and the lawyer puts in standard language, but the spouse doesn't know that, so the spouse gets this thing that says, I want alimony, I want the children, I want child support. And in fact, the person who sent that may be the breadwinner in the family, someone who's very unlikely to get alimony, and but you get this paperwork and you just hit the roof because you're not expecting it, you don't understand it, and it just starts a war. That's what happens. It starts a war before the other side has even had time to breathe. And so the alternative is to reach out and say, look, this isn't working out. It's been 5 years, we've tried. It's been 20 years, and we've changed. Whatever it is. It's 38 years. I got a call yesterday. Things have changed. And I think we should go our separate ways, but I want to do it in a kind and gentle way. I don't want to become enemies. I want to stay, especially if we have kids, I want to stay speaking to each other, hopefully friends. And so, this is how I suggest we go about doing it. So the book is about what litigation looks like and what collaboration or mediation look like, the types of stories that you get out of litigation versus the types of, and I tell the stories of clients that I have known, and I quote them in the book, things that they've said that just resonated in the room. I left a divorce where we'd done it collaboratively, and the wife, on the way out of the courthouse, we were all following the couple. They were talking, and because they have children, and the wife stops them, and she says, and she's the one that asked for the divorce, she throws her arms around them, and she says, I hope you know I will always love you. And I swear that the lawyers just pretty much broke down, because that was incredible that someone would do that, especially right outside the courthouse.
And the thing about the kid, right, and the thing about the kids, they'll always be tied to each other because of the kids that they've had.
That's right, and that's why the holidays can be very difficult, because you love your kids, you want them 100% of the time, but you can't have them 100% of the time because the other parent has pretty much the same rights that you do, unless there's some really egregious circumstance. And so you each want them 100% of the time, and it's kind of like King Solomon. What do? Cut the baby in half? You can't do that. I remember when I married my husband, he had a daughter, and he had most of the time with her. He had what we used to call custody. We don't do that anymore here in Florida. We call it time sharing, so that nobody feels like they're, the bad parent. One used to have custody, and the other got visitation, and the visitation parent was always the bad parent in everyone's minds. The guy who only got them 2 nights a week, or God forbid, every other weekend. And now it's mostly 50-50 time sharing. But Todd had most of the time with his daughter, and we flip-flopped Christmas his ex-wife got Alexa for Christmas, and then we'd have her that year for Christmas Eve. But she was 4 years old, she was 5 years old, she was 6 years old. We just flip-flopped Christmas. Christmas was either Christmas or it was Christmas Eve. She didn't know the difference. She didn't know the difference between December 24 and December 25. And so we just went back and forth like that. You make it work for the best interests of the children. It's all about the kids.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your other book, I Never Saw My Father Again.
Well, the first book was the basics, and then I decided, there's a lot more that I can talk about. People were asking me questions. What happens if you impasse? What happens if it looks like you're going to impasse? You're not going to be able to reach an agreement. Are there strategies that you can employ to get people talking to each other again in strained circumstances? Not every divorce is easy. Of course, most divorces aren't easy, but some are easier than others. And so I wrote a book about the more difficult divorces, and that book also is full of stories. It's funny because I had no idea. War or Peace was a great title. I didn't know what I was going to call the second one. Didn't want to call it War or Peace Volume 2. That seems kind of boring. I was at a cocktail party, and someone said to me, "How did you get into this?" And somehow I ended up telling them the story, and it's this. When I was 7, my parents were divorced. They got divorced in court. We lived in Huntington Beach, California, and when the divorce was final, my mother loaded us, all 4 of us, into the VW bus and drove us 3,000 miles away to New York. And I never saw my father again. I'm 65 years old. I never saw my father again. I was at breakfast one morning with a bunch of financial professionals, and there were like 7 of us in the room. And when I told that story, 2 others of them looked at me, 2 men, and said, the same thing happened to us. I was 11, and the other guy said, I was 9. And the same thing happened to us. You don't want to see that happening to kids. And it's not happening so much anymore, but it still happens. People are deprived of a parent. And I kind of think of it as being blind in one eye. I really only got one point of view. I never saw my parents disagree and come to agreement or agree to disagree. I never saw any of that because my mother made the rules, and that was it. End of story. So I kind of had no depth perception. I didn't know how things could be done. I came to it eventually. Obviously, I went to law school, and I became a successful lawyer. But still, it was not easy. And I think a lot of people who are deprived of that perception, that vision, are really, it's not fair to them. It's just not fair. You're entitled to have 2 parents to help raise you. Even if they disagree on most things, you're entitled to that, right?
Those are very good points. I'm talking with Joryn Jenkins. She's co-parenting challenges during the holidays. She's talking about those particular things. What are some tips for co-parenting during the holidays that you feel would be helpful for people going through divorce?
It's so easy to say the words, and everyone will totally understand what I'm saying, but it's hard to do the acts that need to be done. So, be flexible. Obviously, you have to be flexible. Put yourself in the other parent's shoes. Yeah, of course. I think one of the rules that it took me a long time to come to, and this comes out of not just my own personal experience, but client after client after client. What seems critical in the moment and end of the world, earth-shattering in the moment, becomes inconsequential after a year's gone by. So I remember, and it's easiest to tell stories on my own self. Alexis was 5 or 6 years old, and her class was going to the aquarium, and my husband was the class chaperone for the trip. He volunteered. He took the day off of work. It was on a Monday. And his ex-wife did not return Alexis from visitation. She didn't return her. She knew what was going on, and she purposely did not return the child. My husband went on the class trip without his daughter. And in the moment, I was I was livid. He was livid. She had done it on purpose. It was very obvious. She got a slap on the wrist. It didn't mean anything. And a year later, it was gone. It was over. Alexis didn't care. It wasn't, it was very minor to her. She was 5 years old. We blew it. Arguably, we blew it out of proportion. And that happened several times. But when you think about it in retrospect, and now it's 30 years later, she, for one reason or another, whatever it was, she did not get custody. She didn't even get 50-50 time sharing. And so, to a large degree, she felt robbed. And, so when she could steal time, she did. You kind of got to understand the other side's perspective. But even more than that, just remember that one little incident is not the end of the world. It just isn't. And we see arguments over, are you dropping her off at 6 o'clock or are you dropping her off at 6:15? And, people want to go to court on those. They spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars, $500 an hour lawyers arguing over whether it's a 6 p.m. drop-off or 6:15 p.m. drop-off. So, you really have to try and get a little perspective. Do the bird's eye view rather than the ant's view.
That's a very good way to put it. I agree wholeheartedly there. Now, obviously, the holidays are a joyous time, or should be a joyous time, but why can the holidays be a process? This process is stressful, though, to people.
For one thing, people rarely are starting a divorce during the holidays. We find as lawyers that they come to us in January. They are making it through the holidays, if you will, and, for the sake of the children, which can explode in their faces because tensions are high. There are many divorces where one party has no idea that the divorce is coming, but most of the time they both know that there's going to be something going on, and so Christmas is a very hard time of year for everybody, Christmas and New Year's, especially if there's a divorce in the offing, and even if the one side doesn't know it's coming, the other side does, and it's, stress is, I tell people that divorce is the most stressful event in your life because it's the death of a relationship, but it's not a death where the dead person gets buried and you put flowers there. It's a death where the dead person is still walking around, having a wonderful life, possibly remarrying, and just, it's constantly feeling bad about it. It's the death of the relationship and not the person. So it's it's a bereavement that's just overwhelming. So it's very, very stressful. It's hard to handle. I myself was divorced and developed type 1 diabetes because of it. I was 32. And 2 weeks after I told my husband that we were divorcing, something was wrong. I went to the doctor. He said, well, I think you have diabetes. And I said, that can't be. It doesn't run in my family. That's not possible. And he said, oh, no, you can get diabetes from stress. I just about, my jaw hit the floor. It was shocking to me. So I talk to my clients about the stress, they need to do anything they can to reduce stress in their lives. And talking with the spouse can actually reduce stress, in my opinion, if it's handled properly. In a collaborative divorce, we usually have a mental health facilitator who helps the folks communicate and helps them avoid trigger words and use the right kinds of terminology to help the other side understand what they're trying to say. And so it does make it a lot easier to deal with. It reduces the stress tremendously. Even if you're already divorced, the holidays obviously are very, very stressful because of the sharing. Because, sharing is hard. Sharing is hard even if you're an adult, much less kids.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you so much. We're talking with Joryn Jenkins. She's co-parenting challenges during the holidays, talking to us on KIIC. How about this one? Can being realistic about the situation help the understanding level of everyone involved?
Well, yeah, but again, being realistic is kind of like taking the bird's eye view. When you're in the middle of a hash-up, you lose perspective, and it's hard to be realistic. All all the time in divorce work, I have people who are asking for things that don't make sense. Like, my first example, you get a petition, and the petition says, I want alimony. Excuse me, you're representing the breadwinner, and you're asking for alimony from my stay-at-home wife? That's crazy. But it happens because we file forms, and the lawyers file forms. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying lawyers shouldn't be filing those forms, because those forms protect the lawyers from accusations of legal malpractice. So I can file a request for alimony if I'm representing the husband, the breadwinner, and because they may not get divorced for 2 years. Divorces sometimes last a long time. I've had several that went 5 years where the people just could not be realistic, and they just dragged it on and on and on. They didn't care. They were spending money. They didn't care. And so when they're not being realistic, I had a lawyer tell me last night, I was at a Christmas party, he had a client who had told him that all she wanted to do was use up all their money, use it all up. She didn't care. On legal fees, she did not care. But you've got the lawyer who has to file the motion, because if the divorce lasts for 2 or 3 years, by then the breadwinner may be crippled and may need alimony. So you just never know what's going to happen during the intervening time. So you have to file the appropriate paperwork, because if you didn't, you can't ask for it later under certain circumstances. So it's really, going to court, litigating is just very convoluted, complex, and not an easy way to separate a relationship. It's not, I like to say that in the collaborative divorce context, I restructure relationships. I don't demolish them. I don't destroy them. I restructure them.
Interesting points as well. We're talking with Joryn Jenkins, a collaborative lawyer in terms of co-parenting. And you've kind of touched on this earlier, but in your experience, what do most separated and divorced parents do during the holidays to make things work for each party and the kids?
They try to be flexible. They try to work around. So, look at things from the kid's perspective. Any child would happily have 2 Christmas mornings or 2 Christmas Eves, whatever it is that in your family you focus on. Opening gifts. Some families open gifts in the morning. Some families open Santa gifts in the morning, but open interpersonal gifts in the evening. So you create new traditions. Maybe you used to have certain traditions before the divorce, but now you have to create new traditions to accommodate the new context. People don't think about that. Oh, no, we always do it this way. I did it this way growing up. We've done it this way since we were married. I'm not going to change now. No, you're divorced now. You need to consider a new way of doing things so that both sides can get what they want. There's a way often that people don't see initially to make the pie bigger. So, and I can give you a perfect example that really does have to do with co-parenting, actually. I had a couple that was getting divorced. He was a fireman. She was a deputy sheriff. They both wanted 100% of the time with the child, and that was not possible, obviously. But what we did do in that context, because of their work schedules, each of them went to their employers and arranged to have a schedule that was completely different from the other one. So one of them could have the child during the child's waking hours. The other one could have the child during the child's waking hours. And they each worked while the other one had the child, and then the child slept. So if you look at a day that's 3 segments long, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, then they each enjoyed 8 hours of waking time because they worked while the other parents had 8 hours of waking time. They didn't work at the same time. It wasn't like they both worked 9 to 5, because they didn't. But they arranged that, and therefore they maxed out their pies. They each got, if you think of it that way, they each probably had 75% time sharing, which is ridiculous. That's how did you do that? Well, they worked their time schedule so that it worked out that way. Another example would be where we had taxes. The parties owed taxes, and mom was going to get the child care exemption, and that was going to be worth, it was only going to be worth $1,000 to her because she he didn't make as much money as Dad did. Well, if Dad got the exemption, it was worth $2,000. And so we gave the exemption to Dad, and then he split it with Mom. So Mom still got her $1,000, but Dad got $1,000 that didn't really exist before. So you can make the pie bigger by looking at it a different way and sharing it differently. And so that's what we work on doing in collaborative divorces. You just go to the judge and say, here, split up the pie, and the judge does it the way the judge always does it. But if you have a financial professional in the room who's thinking about how to maximize, and the facilitator who's thinking best how to communicate, and the lawyers who are creative in this kind of, because you can agree to anything you want to. I tell clients all the time, the law should be your last resort. Who cares what the law says, as long as what you agree on between the two of you is not illegal? You can agree to do anything you want.
Well, I think that's the bottom line here, is the communication part is very vital and important, and between the two people, what they agree on is going to make it work out phenomenal for the kids.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm talking with Joryn Jenkins. We appreciate you calling in today and telling us about co-parenting during the holidays, Joryn. To you as well, have a happy holiday and a happy New Year.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah. Happy holiday and a happy New Year as well. Take good care.